Snow doesn't fall in Wolf Jaw Hollow anymore, it piles, as if the sky itself is trying to bury what's down here. The Ridge Road gave up trying to reach this place sometime before the Korean War. What's left is a wagon trace choked with rhododendron so thick the sun only finds the ground in thin, sick blades. Folks in the county seat, 30 miles of switchbacks away, still call it the Whitaker Cut, though no Whitaker has answered to the law since 1923. They just say, the family, the way you lower your voice and cross yourself, even if you're Baptist. The year was 1893 and the coal seams under Black Bear Mountain had already begun to cough their black blood into the creeks. Elijah Whitaker came down off the ridge with soot in the creases of his knuckles and a widow's grief still wet on his collar. His wife, Ruth, had died birthing their sixth child, a boy born too early and too blue who never drew breath. They buried her and the baby together in a single narrow hole behind the cabin because the ground was iron hard and Elijah's heart was harder. He stood over that grave until the shovel handle blistered his palms, then walked inside, poured 3 fingers of corn liquor and decided the land would not have another piece of him. The Whitaker tract was 300 acres of steep laurel hells and limestone sinks, granted to his granddaddy for fighting the British at King's Mountain and never once divided because Whitakers did not sell and did not share. But 6 children take feeding, and the company store took its cut in flesh if you let it. Elijah looked at the mouths waiting on him and saw only one way to keep the boundary intact. His brother Caleb had died of the flux 2 winters earlier, leaving a wife named Delphia and a daughter, Cora Lee, just turned 16. Delphia was Elijah's first cousin once removed. Cora Lee was both his niece and his first cousin once removed again, the way the branches looped back on themselves in these mountains like vines choking their own trellis. Delphia had the same narrow Whitaker face, the same pale eyes the color of creek ice takes just before it breaks. When Elijah rode down to her cabin on the mule with a sack of cornmeal and a proposition, she was shelling beans on the porch and did not look up right away. "I ain't a skin for love," he told her straight out. "I'm a skin for the land to stay whole. Marry me and Cora Lee can stay too. We'll raise all the young uns together like they was all ours from the start." Delphia kept snapping beans, the pods cracking like tiny bones. She had buried a husband and 3 babies of her own. She knew what loneliness tasted like when the fire went out and the wind found every chink in the logs. After a long minute she said, "Blood's already mixed plenty. Might as well keep it where we can watch it." They stood up before the circuit preacher the following Sunday in a service that lasted 7 minutes because the preacher had 3 more hollows to reach before dark. He wrote their names in his ledger with a stub of pencil, hesitated, then drew a single careful line connecting Elijah to Delphia and another from Delphia up to Cora Lee, the way a man might mark livestock that belonged to the same brand. Nobody in the congregation spoke against it. Half of them were kin in one direction or another, and the other half owed Elijah money. Cora Lee wore a dress dyed butternut brown because that was the only color they had. She was slight, all wrists and cheekbones, with hair the red-black of fresh liver. When the preacher asked if she took this man, her voice came out steady, almost curious, like a child testing how a new word feels in the mouth. Elijah slipped a plain iron ring on her finger too. He had filed it himself from a wagon tire because gold was for people who planned on leaving. That night the 3 of them lay in the big bed Elijah had built for Ruth, Elijah in the middle, Delphia on his left, Cora Lee on his right, the younger children already asleep on pallets by the hearth. The fire popped and settled. Outside, March wind scraped the ridge like a dull knife. Elijah stared up at the soot-blackened rafters and felt the mountain press down on the roof, satisfied. The circle was closed. Nothing would leak out, nothing would come in. In the weeks that followed, neighbors who passed the cabin on their way to the mine noticed the 2 women working side by side in the garden, one graying, one just blooming, both moving with the same spare economy of motion, the same tilt of the head when they listened for something coming up the trace. They noticed Elijah no longer rode to town alone on Saturday nights. They noticed the way he looked at Cora Lee when she carried water from the spring, a look that was half hunger and half ownership, as if he had bought something rare and intended to keep it in the house forever. By corn planting time Cora Lee's waist had begun to thicken. Delphia cut down one of Ruth's old dresses and let out the seams without comment. When the first kick fluttered under Cora Lee's ribs, she pressed Elijah's hand there and smiled a small, secret smile, the first real one anyone had seen on her since her daddy died. Elijah felt the movement and something fierce and frightened opened inside his chest like a second heart. He whispered against her belly, not a prayer exactly, more like a vow spoken to the dark, "This one lives. This one stays. No matter what it takes." And the mountain, ancient and patient, listened. The laurels closed a little tighter around the hollow. The creek changed its tune, running thicker, slower, as if it too had decided to keep what belonged to it. High on the ridge, a panther screamed once and then never again, like it had seen the future and chosen another hunting ground. 7 generations later, when the blood had turned in on itself so many times it ran backward, they would still speak of that spring with something close to reverence. The spring Elijah Whitaker locked the gate from the inside and threw away the key, believing he was saving his family when all he had done was begin its long, slow drowning in itself. The winter of 1933 came down the mountain like a judgment. Coal prices had fallen so low a man could burn money for warmth and come out ahead, but there was no money either. The company store locked its doors to anyone whose script was read, and half the hollows in eastern Kentucky went to bed hungry with the taste of pine bark still in their teeth. In Wolf Jaw Hollow the Whitaker clan, now 37 souls crammed into 4 leaning cabins, had not seen cash money since Hoover was president, but they had corn in the crib and a smokehouse full of hams cured with the same salt their granddaddy had carried over the Cumberland Gap. They had each other. That was supposed to be enough. Cora Lee, who had been both wife and niece to Elijah until the influenza took him in 1918, was the matriarch now. 56 years old, spine bent like a hickory bough, she still ruled with a look that could quiet a room faster than a hickory switch. Her eldest boy, Amos, had married his cousin Eula. Their mothers were sisters, and Eula was big again with what would be their 9th. The baby was late, stubborn, kicking so hard some nights Eula swore it was trying to claw its way out through her ribs. The pain started on a Tuesday when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze the slop bucket solid on the porch. By Wednesday the snow was knee-deep and drifting higher, and the creek had frozen so thick the mule teams could have crossed it if any mules had been left alive. Eula screamed through the day and into the night while Cora Lee and the other women boiled water they had to melt from snow and passed the same rag from hand to hand until it turned the color of rust. Amos paced outside in the yard, boots crunching, breath hanging white and frantic. Every few minutes he pressed his ear to the chinking and heard his wife make a sound no human throat should make. He wanted to ride for the doctor in town, but the trail was gone under white, and even if he could have found it, no doctor would come this far for Whitakers. They had learned long ago that doctors asked questions, wrote things down, sometimes sent men with clipboards and court orders. Inside, the fire burned low because the woodpile was buried. The room stank of blood and sweat and the sharp, metallic fear that comes when women know something is wrong in a way prayer can't fix. At dawn on the 3rd day Eula's screaming stopped sudden as a snapped thread. Cora Lee reached inside and felt the cord wrapped twice around the neck, tight as baling twine. She cut it with the skinning knife she kept for hogs, and the baby slid out blue and silent, slick with something darker than blood. They wrapped it in a flour sack and laid it on Eula's chest to see if warmth and heartbeat might coax it into the world. The child was a boy, perfect except for the color, not the angry red of a fresh newborn but a deep indigo, the shade of storm clouds banked against the ridge. His lips were purple, his fingernails black at the tips. When he finally opened his eyes they were the pale, washed-out blue of a man who has bled out under the snow. Cora Lee knew the look. She had seen it once before in stillborn lambs and once, years ago, in a cousin who lived 3 days and then slipped away while the banshee wailed on the roof. But this baby breathed. Shallow, ragged, but he breathed. His tiny chest fluttered like a trapped moth. Eula, half-conscious, reached up and touched the infant's cheek and whispered, "He's cold as creek clay." They did not name him right away. Names are promises, and nobody wanted to promise this child anything. For a week he lay in a crate by the hearth, swaddled in whatever cloth was clean, fed drops of goat's milk from a rag. His color never changed. In the firelight he looked carved from a single bruise. The older children stared, fascinated and afraid, until Cora Lee chased them out with a hickory limb. At night the baby made almost no sound, only a faint whistling wheeze, as if the air itself heard him going in and coming out. Amos sat beside the crate and talked to his son the way men talk to dying horses, low, steady, useless. He told him about the land he would inherit, the coal that might still be under it, the deer that would come down off the ridge when the snow got deeper. The baby watched him with those pale eyes and never blinked long enough. On the 9th night the wind shifted and the temperature rose just enough to turn the snow to sleet that rattled the tin roof like buckshot. Eula's fever broke and she asked to hold her son. They laid the blue child against her breast and for the first time he latched, greedy, making a sound almost like purring. Milk ran from the corners of his mouth the color of weak coffee where it mixed with the film that coated his skin. Eula cried without sound, tears cutting clean tracks through the sweat and blood on her face. Coralie stood in the doorway and watched them, arms folded tight to keep her hands from shaking. She thought of Elijah's vow all those years ago, the night he closed the gate. She thought of the way the mountain sometimes took payment in coin you never agreed to spend. Outside, the sleet kept falling, coating the trees until branches cracked under the weight and fell like gunshots in the dark. Inside, the newest Whitaker opened his strange eyes and looked straight at his grandmother as if he already understood the bargain that had been struck long before he drew his first impossible breath, July 1964, and the air in Wolf Jaw Hollow hung so thick you could wring it out like a dish rag. The cicadas screamed all day in the blackjack oaks, and the creek had shrunk to a chain of muddy puddles where crawdads baked in their own shells. The outside world was burning, Mississippi, Vietnam, Birmingham, but up here the only news came from a battery radio that caught two stations, one playing Flat and Scruggs, the other preaching hellfire in a voice like a busted muffler. The revival tent went up on the old ball ground at the mouth of the hollow, white canvas blazing against the green dark like a surrender flag nobody asked for. The preacher's name was Brother Ezekiel Crow, tall and raw-boned with a black suit shiny at the elbows and eyes the color of coal dust after the shine is gone. He had come down from Ohio with a trailer full of folding chairs and a promise to drive the devil out of Whitaker's cut once and for all. Word was he had already cast demons out of a woman in Harlan who spoke backward Latin, and another in Pikeville who birthed a calf. They came at dusk, the family, barefoot and silent, sliding out of the laurel like smoke. 39 of them now, counting the blue boy, Harlan, they had finally named him, who was 31 but looked both older and younger, skin still the color of spoiled damson plums, moving slow the way deep-water fish move. They sat in the back rows, shoulder to shoulder, eyes catching the lantern light like animals that have learned to hide in plain sight. Brother Ezekiel took the pulpit with a Bible the size of a grave slab. He did not open it at first. He only stared out over the congregation, mostly curious Baptists from the hard road and a few drunks hoping for free lemonade, and let the silence stretch until the tent itself seemed to sweat. Then he lifted one long finger and pointed straight at the Whitakers. "I see you," he said, voice soft as a straight razor silk. "Children of Cain. Seed of the serpent. You have lain with your own and birthed abomination, and the Lord God has marked you for it." A ripple went through the family the way wind moves across standing wheat. Harlan's head came up slow. Amos's boy Luther, 16 and already growing into the family jaw, half rose before his mother dragged him down by the shirt. Coralie's granddaughter Ruthann began to keen, a high thin sound like a hare with its leg in a trap. The preacher kept on. He spoke of Onan and of Lot's daughters, of the sins that cry from the ground, of blood that had forgotten how to be clean. He said the blue skin was only the outside of what festered within, that every crooked finger and clouded eye was a signature on a covenant with the devil signed in the marriage bed. He said the hollow itself was cursed, that the trees grew twisted because they drank from the same poisoned well. When he called them forward for deliverance, not one Whitaker moved. They only watched him with those pale, pale eyes, the color running thinner with every generation, until Brother Ezekiel's voice cracked like green wood in a fire. Spit flew from his mouth and caught the lantern light and hung there like tiny burning stars. At the end he raised both arms and cursed them outright. Told them the wrath of God would fall before the new moon, that their seed would dry up and their name would be blotted out. Then he slammed the Bible shut so hard the pulpit Bible stand jumped. The congregation fled into the night muttering and crossing themselves. The Whitakers waited until the last tail light disappeared down the ridge road, then rose as one and walked back into the dark without a word. Brother Ezekiel stayed behind with 2 deacons to strike the tent. They worked by lantern, rolling canvas, stacking chairs, sweat mixing with the kerosene stink. Around midnight the preacher stepped out to piss and never came back. The deacons found his head floating in the branch and his Bible nailed to a sweet gum with a 16-penny nail straight through the Song of Solomon. The pages were open to Leviticus, and someone had drawn a careful red circle around the line, "Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's sister," and beneath it, in letters still wet, the words, "We keep what is ours." They searched until dawn with dogs and flashlights. Found one of his shoes on the trail that led up toward Wolf Jaw, heel crushed like something heavy had stepped on it once and walked on. Nothing else. Not a drop of blood, not a scrap of black coat. Just the Bible hanging there, pages fluttering whenever the wind remembered how to move. 3 nights later the tent caught fire. Burned so hot the metal poles twisted like licorice. Folks said they heard laughing inside the flames, high and childish, the kind that stops when you turn around quick. After that, no preacher ever set foot in the hollow again. Travelers on the Ridge Road started reporting a tall man in a black suit walking the trace at dusk, hatless, Bible tucked under one arm, heading deeper in. Always heading deeper in. They say if you blink he's gone, but the sweet gum still stands where the ball ground used to be, and every July the bark splits open just enough to show the scar where something was nailed through the heart of the book and left to bleed. August 1988 smelled like diesel and honeysuckle gone sour. The county had finally paved the Ridge Road all the way to the old logging spur, and the first outsiders in decades started finding excuses to drive it: surveyors, timber cruisers, a preacher with Ohio plates who never made it past the first switchback. One of them was a census worker named Daniel Ray Meredith, 26 years old, fresh out of Morehead State with a sociology degree and a Polaroid camera hanging around his neck like a press badge. He had a clipboard, a government per diem, and the kind of earnest smile that made people want to tell him things they later regretted. He came bumping up the trace in a rust-flecked Datsun pickup with federal plates, windows down, Steve-O cassette rattling the dash. The hollow tried to hide the way it always did, laurels leaning across the road until their leaves scraped paint, mudholes deep enough to swallow a tire to the axle, but Daniel Ray had a topographic map and stubbornness in equal measure. Around 4 in the afternoon he rounded the last bend and the cabins appeared sudden as a held breath, for sagging structures patched with billboard tin and plastic sheeting, smoke coming up thin and gray through stovepipes crusted with creosote. Dogs came out first, silent the way Whitaker dogs always were, ribs showing, eyes the washed out and patient. Then the people. They stood on porches or stepped out of doors and simply waited, 30-odd bodies dressed in whatever had lasted longest, feed sack dresses, army jackets from 3 wars ago, bare feet black as coal dust. Daniel Ray killed the engine and the mountain noise rushed in to fill the vacuum. Tree frogs, a cowbell somewhere far off, the slow drip of water off a roof that had forgotten how to be straight. He got out slow, hands visible, and introduced himself the way they taught him in training. Said he was just counting heads for the 1990 census, no trouble, wouldn't take but a minute. Most families slammed doors at that point, but the Whitakers only watched. An old woman with a face sharp enough to split kindling, Ruth Ann, though he never learned her name, tilted her head and said, "We're all here. Always have been." Her voice sounded like a handsaw going through pine knots. Daniel Ray started taking pictures almost without thinking. The camera was supposed to be for mapping addresses, but something about the light, the bruised, slanted light that never quite reached the ground, made him lift it again and again. He shot the cabins leaning into one another like they were holding each other up after a long fight. Shot the children with their too wide foreheads and translucent eyelids. Shot Harlan, 55 now, sitting on an overturned bucket whittling a stick into smaller and smaller sticks, skin still the color of a drowned man, eyes following the lens the way a cat follows a bird it has already decided to kill. They let him walk the yard. They even let him inside the nearest cabin where the air was thick with wood smoke and something sweeter, metallic, like a butcher shop left closed too long. On a quilt that had once been wedding ring pattern he saw a baby no more than a month old, skin mottled blue-gray, breathing fast and shallow through its nose while its tiny fists opened and closed on nothing. The mother, maybe 17, rocked it without singing, eyes never leaving Daniel Ray's face. He wrote things down faster than he meant to. Names that repeated, Elijah, Cora Lee, Amos, Harlan, dates of birth that didn't make sense, mothers listed as aunts, fathers listed as uncles, sometimes both. He wrote about teeth gone early, about limbs that ended in soft stubs, about the way no one over 30 seemed to have all their fingers. When he asked about doctors they laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraped across tin. By dusk he had filled 20 pages and half a box of film. The family fed him pinto beans and cornbread without salt because salt cost money and money was for town. He ate because refusing would have been worse. When the sun dropped behind the ridge the temperature fell 20 degrees in as many minutes and the dogs began to pace. Ruthann told him plain he ought to start back before full dark. Daniel Ray smiled that earnest smile again, thanked them for their cooperation, and promised he'd be in touch if there were any questions. He never made it to the Datsun. 3 weeks later a manila envelope arrived at the little duplex in Moorhead where Daniel Ray's wife, 6 months pregnant, was watering the porch ferns and trying not to cry in front of neighbors. No return address. Inside were the 23 Polaroids he had taken that day, every single face scratched out with something sharp, nails, maybe, or a screwdriver, until only the eyes remained, pale and staring, like holes punched in reality. Tucked among them was his census clipboard, pages blank except for one line written in red ballpoint that had soaked through 3 sheets. We keep what is ours. The truck was found a month later at the bottom of a strip mine high wall, burned to the frame, seats melted into black puddles. No body. No camera. No notebook. Just the license plate curled like a dead spider and, melted into the steering wheel, the plastic housing of a Kentucky driver's license with the photo bubbled away to nothing. After that the county rerouted the mail jeep. The timber cruisers found reasons to mark the Whitaker tract inaccessible. Children in the grade school down at Garrett learned a new hand game that involved scratching out faces on paper and whispering "We keep what is ours" before the teacher could see. And in Wolf Jaw Hollow the Polaroids went up on a wall inside the oldest cabin, pinned with rusty nails in a perfect grid, eyes watching the room forever, waiting for the next stranger who thought paper and questions could open a door that had been nailed shut from the inside almost 100 years before, December 24, 2024, and the sky over Wolf Jaw Hollow has turned the color of a fresh bruise. An ice storm moved in just after sunset, coating every twig and power line in glass so thick the pines bow like old men carrying coffins. The temperature is dropping faster than whiskey in a hollow leg, and the only road out, a 1-lane scar of red dog clay, has washed into the creek in 3 places already. The outside world is gone. Cell towers are down, satellites blind, the ridge a wall of white static. Inside the hollow there is only the wind worrying the tin roofs and the low, steady moan of a girl who has been in labor since the first sleet began to fall. Her name is Mercy, though nobody has called her that since she was small. 16 now, belly swollen tight as a tick, she lies on a mattress dragged close to the cookstove because the chimney in the back room collapsed last spring and was never rebuilt. The baby is turned wrong, everybody knows it, has known it for weeks, but there was nowhere to go and no money to get there even if the road had stayed open. Mercy's water broke at 3 in the afternoon, a dark gush that smelled like pennies and lilac water gone bad, and since then the pains have come closer and closer until there is no space between them, only one long scream wearing her body like a coat too small. They have gathered, every living Whitaker who can still walk. 27 souls packed into the oldest cabin, the one Elijah built with his own hands when the mountain was younger. Harlan sits in the corner on a nail keg, blue skin gleaming with sweat though the room is barely holds above freezing. He is 91 and looks like something that never quite finished dying. Ruthann, his niece-daughter, kneels between Mercy's knees with hands that have brought more than 60 babies into this hollow and taken almost as many back out again. The kerosene lamps throw long shadows that crawl up the log walls, and every face looks carved from the same exhausted, hungry wood. The father of the child stands just outside the circle of light. His name is Jonah, 33 years old, Mercy's uncle on her mother's side and her half-brother on her father's. He has the family eyes, pale almost to white, and the same 6 fingers on each hand that have marked the line since the 1940s. He has not spoken since Mercy started screaming his name instead of God's. His fists open and close like he is trying to wring water from stone. There is no doctor, no midwife from the county health, no ambulance that could climb the ridge even in summer. There is only Ruthann muttering numbers under her breath, counting heartbeats the way her own mother taught her, feeling for the cord, feeling for the head that will not turn. There is only the jar of moonshine passed hand to hand to keep the cold out and the fear in. There is only the wind and the ice and the sound Mercy makes when another contraction folds her in half, a sound too old for her throat. Harlan lifts his head sudden as a hound catching scent. His voice, when it comes, is the dry rustle of dead leaves across a porch nobody sweeps anymore. It's the last one, he says. Pure as it's ever gonna get. After this the blood won't hold no more. Nobody argues. They have all seen the signs, babies born with the skull plates already fused, hearts that beat on the wrong side, eyes that never open. They have seen the way the creek ran red for 3 days last spring though nothing upstream had died. They have seen Mercy's belly mapped with bruises shaped like handprints that were there before anyone laid a hand on her. Ruth Ann looks up, eyes shining with lamp oil and something older. We can feel 2 heartbeats, she says. One strong, one weak. If we cut, maybe the strong one lives. If we don't, maybe neither. Jonah makes a sound like a hurt dog and takes 1 step forward. Mercy reaches out blind, fingers clawing air until they find his sleeve. She pulls him down until his ear is against her lips. Whatever she whispers makes the color drain even from his pale face. He nods once, slow, the way a man nods when the trap finally closes. Outside the storm thickens. The glass on the windows blooms with frost flowers that look almost like faces pressed against the panes. Inside, the fire pops and sends up a spark that lands on the quilt and smolders there, unnoticed. Mercy arches one final time, a bow drawn past breaking, and the room holds its breath the way the mountain has held its breath for 130 years. The baby crown's slick and dark, hair already thick and black as crow feathers. Ruth Ann's hands move sure now, practiced, the way a butcher's hands know exactly where the joints give. There is a wet sound, a gasp, and then the long, impossible slide of new life into old death. The child does not cry. It opens eyes the clear, perfect gray of creek ice before the silt gets in them, and looks around the room as if it has been here before and is only now remembering the way home. In the silence that follows, the wind stops sudden as a held breath, and every lamp in the cabin gutters at once though no door has moved. Mercy turns her face to the wall. Blood pools beneath her, thick and shining, spreading across the worn pine boards like a shadow finally given weight. Harlan leans forward and touches one crooked blue finger to the baby's forehead, leaving a print that looks almost like a blessing and almost like a brand. Somewhere deep in the hollow a tree cracks under the ice and falls with a sound like the mountain laughing at its own joke. The family closes ranks around the mattress, shoulder to shoulder, generation to generation, the circle tighter than it has ever been. And in the dark just beyond the window glass, something that has waited a very long time leans closer to watch.